Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Just Jordan Things, where today we're going to be doing something new. We're going to be doing a book report, book review, I don't know. But I read this book and I liked it, I annotated it, I took notes, and now we're going to have a discussion about it online. This is the book Complicit, How Our Culture Enables Misbehaving Men by Reah Bravo, and I highly recommend it, if you couldn't tell by me wanting to do a full book report on it. You don't necessarily have to have read this book to be able to participate in this discussion, because I took notes and will be reading the quotes from the book that are pertinent here. But if you would like to read this book, I have linked it down in the description below so you can go find it. Go look for it on your Libby app for free. I will never not plug the library resources. Now, before we start, as I'm sure you've already seen from the title, this is probably gonna ruffle some feathers. But the thing I like about books like this are the misleading nature of how long the book actually is, because we've got 26 pages of reference material and sources in the back of this book. See where the annotations stop? That means there's facts and data to back up all of the things in here. With any good deep dive, of course, there's anecdotal evidence alongside the research and data. So if you have anecdotal evidence you would like to share in the comments, please go ahead and share your life experiences that are pertinent to what we're discussing here today, because I'm pretty sure if you're a woman and you've been in the workplace, you've experienced something that we're going to talk about that's happened in this book. I've kind of broken it into 3 different parts: how we got here, what we don't see, and how to fix it. So let's dive right in. Start with part 1, the social framework and where we are today. One of the first quotes I highlighted in this book is this: "We are each the protagonist of our own story in which none of us are the bad guy." Dozer wants to be a part of this talk. Hold on. Hello, sir. Sorry, I started without you. My bad. Unlike those whom we vilify, when it comes to our own lives, we have all the context necessary to justify our own behavior. That is a powerful quote, not only with this discussion, but in all things that we see. There is no nuance on the internet, and there is no nuance that we have the capacity for with strangers. Hello. But this also comes into play when we're justifying things for ourselves. What we would easily mark as bad behavior from a stranger, we might justify in ourselves and give the reasons and the context and understand why it's not that bad of behavior. That brings us to quote number 2. Sorry. Diving right into it. Oh, I guess this is where I should put a disclaimer. There is going to be some heavy topics that we're talking about in this discussion. So trigger warning for sexually explicit and graphic topics. That was your warning. Anonymous surveys of American men consistently show so long as the words rape or sexual assault are not used to describe the encounter, male subjects will freely acknowledge having had non-consensual sex or having penetrated a woman against her will, while remaining steadfast in their belief that what transpired bore no resemblance to rape. I've mentioned this a few times on my channel, but I can guarantee that the people that have sexually assaulted me in my past have no concept that what they did was actual assault. The manipulation, the coercion, the expectation, the begging and pleading and just like, well, please, like, what if it's just a little bit, and like pressure to do something that someone doesn't really want to do, but eventually caves in. Yeah, that's not okay. But as we saw with that quote and the data that backs it up, let's study. That data is from a 2017 article by Heather Murphy, What Experts Know About Men Who Rape, in the New York Times, if you'd like to go verify. But men will admit to the act of what is defined as rape, as long as it's not called rape. That's where we're currently at. That's the problem. And sometimes they'll boast about it. We've heard these conversations. It's rewarded if you can convince someone to sleep with you even though they don't want to, right? Like, these are the things that are kind of ingrained in our subculture and what we see in media, what we grow up with, what is exposed, what we're exposed to. I'm sure we can all pinpoint a reference that we've seen in either a TV show or a movie of a man doing something like that, or in news articles where people try to justify, oh, it wasn't that bad, or, well, did she do this, or what was she wearing? Was she asking for it? Drives me crazy. But it is a huge problem, because regardless of how you feel, if you're guilty, if you're feeling guilty because that word, rape or sexual assault, isn't the intention that you had, does not change the fact of the result of what it was for the individual that was experiencing it. We'll dive deeper. Oh, television. This is an interesting one. 45. This is another study from a man named Gerbner. And in this study, he suggested that television instilled in many of its viewers a resistance to social change as it is concerning gender relations. He cited research indicating that the more television people watched, even when accounting for differences between light viewers and heavy viewers, the more sexist their beliefs were. I hate that. I have a couple more quotes here about TV before we dive into a discussion on it. This quote literally is just, the 90s made us all fucking misogynists. The 90s, a decade when reductive, hypersexualized, consumeristic narratives of womanhood took hold of our culture, successfully conflating women's sexual objectification with their own empowerment. It was when Victoria's Secret was booming. It was when words like MILF and tramp stamp were popularized, and when porn wormed its way into every household via the internet. And we all know that the implications of porn in the expectations of young minds and their experiences with sex is pretty bad. Now, we also look at the characters that were present in the 90s. And this is the part that was really interesting to me, because there's some of these characters that I didn't even recognize as like subliminally problematic as far as like self-image and the patriarchy and just how your opinions of yourself are formed as a young woman. So studies show that when adolescent girls and women are exposed to the objectification of other women, they are more likely to objectify themselves. Think of some of the sitcoms you watched in the 90s and what the prominent women figures were. Who were they? It was the strong woman that was confident about her sexuality and could go out and do whatever she wanted if she was hot. Caveat: she had to fit the prominent hot criteria to be able to be confident and do those things. If she wasn't hot, she had to have a makeover first. There's lots of transformations and makeovers and quirky people discovering their confidence by changing the way they looked to a more uniform appearance. Here's a good quote exemplifying that. This was the decade when housemates looked like Jennifer Aniston or Courtney Cox. Female bosses looked like Heather Locklear. Lawyers looked like Callista Flockhart. Orthopedic surgeons look like Cameron Diaz. Off-shift prostitutes look like Julia Roberts. Vampire slayers look like Sarah Michael Gellar. And the woman who would save us from a deadly riptide looked like Pamela Anderson. High school girls were played by Tiffany Amber, Jenny Gardner, or Alicia Silverstone. And if their appearance was more that of Brittany Murphy or Drew Barrymore, the storyline incorporated a dramatic physical makeover upon which their social acceptance hinged. That makes a lot of sense when you also compare this to the magazines and what the media was portraying in the 90s about image and the raging eating disorders that happened because of the plus size woman that was exemplified on TV. Yeah, terrible, right? And growing up, you don't realize that any of this is problematic. I grew up watching Peg Bundy being like, wow, what a strong woman. What a great character. What a fun personality and person and life to live. Wasn't her husband? Her husband was not it. No, that was not the ideal life that I should have been glamorizing as a child. I also found this really interesting when doing some digging on the backstory of the Addams family, not related to this book, but kind of related to this book, is when they first came out, they were the weird, quirky, untraditional, like opposition of the traditional household in America because the mother and father loved each other. Now that's saying something. Now, this next study was really interesting to read because it's our perception of women when they understand the consequences of their actions and when they're doing something intentionally for the cause of the greater good and how we reflect repercussions back onto them. Chapter 1. If you would like to go look up the entire study that I'm about to talk about, it is by Virginia Young, titled #MeToo, Media Coverage Sympathetic to, but Not Necessarily Empowering for Women, from 2019, cmu.edu. This study was set up to examine how people reacted to if a woman understood the repercussions of making a choice or not. And what was found is the perception of a woman's inherent weakness, regardless of any amount of sympathy, is the psychological fodder for victim blaming. It means in our heads, the abuse that she is getting was the natural consequence of her own frailty. So instead of being sympathetic to the victim, we see it as problematic that she could be abused because she's just weak. Not putting the accountability on the person doing the abuse. It is the problem that the victim is too weak to handle what the world has thrown at her. That comes full circle to me about quotes on like virginity and like the lock and key analogy that just are so dastardly problematic. I'm sure we've all heard this, is a woman's virginity is seen as like a treasure, like we want to protect that, but a man's virginity is seen as weakness for him. Or like the lock and key, where a key that can open many locks is seen as like valuable, but a lock that can be opened by any key is worthless. Like those little sayings, we don't realize how, one, stupid they actually are, but two, how they link to this mindset. Here's from another similar study where they set up a group of participants observing a woman make a decision that would cause herself suffering that she knew, but it was for the better. I believe this was the electroshock experiment where she wasn't actually getting shocked, she was just acting. And the participants saw her getting shocked. And they knew that she had the choice of either shocking herself or shocking someone else. And she chose to shock herself so that other people would not get shocked. And the less they thought she was being compensated for the suffering, the more the participants disliked her, and the more they faulted her for not giving the correct answer. So she willingly would give the incorrect answer so that she would shock herself and not other people. But if she was being paid to give the wrong answer, they had more sympathy for her, which is crazy that this is human behavior. This is ingrained in our psyche. And I've said this, if you've ever had a conversation with me about the world and kind of like my view on everything and why people do things, why people do bad things, it's because people have always been doing bad things. We are inherently bad, right? Human cultures have been killing each other, living for their own egos, and exploiting other humans for all of human history. If you think of any culture that we can kind of like conceive that has, from the Romans, Vikings, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, any war, any conquest, any history we can imagine, humans have been shitty to other humans across the board. I don't understand why we think we're different from that now. You have to actively try not to be shitty towards other humans. And this research helps point to why that is. We have this subconscious kind of perception. Why? It could be the media, it could be the patriarchy, or it could just be the humans are shitty. Whatever it is, we know it's not something that we want to do, right? It's not morally aligned with what we think and want humans to be. We want humans to be good. Good, subjective, of course, but accepting, understanding, kind. Societally, we kind of align with those values. The last quote for part one and where we are now is the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. I know, a lot to unpack there. Benefits the women who are obedient to it. It rewards obedience under its standards, and usually for white women. I know. We're talking about race. But remember, this is not opinions, this is research. We're looking at data. We use our patriarchal narratives to effortlessly craft a sense of self in which our rank is God-given. We don't question when we're told during a job interview that we'd be a good fit. We don't question in our rental applications when it gets accepted amid a housing crisis, or years later when we have access to a mortgage. We don't question the vision we have of our future because we've never not seen celebrated representation of women who look like us. By us, and we mean white women. And I know, this is a lot to digest. It's a lot to hear. You might not agree with it, but it doesn't change the facts and reality of what's actually happening in this world and the real life scenarios that other people have to live in because of the privilege we have as white people. I told you it was going to ruffle some feathers, but again, facts, science, research, information that comes from more than just opinions. Now, let's talk about what we don't see. We're calling this section Women at Work and the Work Wife. Oh gosh. I'm sure some of you at this point think that this book belongs on the floor, but I assure you that this is an important conversation that needs to be had, even if it makes you uncomfortable to have it. Page 69, Women's Role at Work. Now, if you are a woman and you've ever been in the corporate world and you've experienced what I'm about to say, leave me a comment. Okay, this is your moment. If you haven't commented yet, I want to hear your stories because they're important to share. We should not just accept that this is the shitty card that was dealt with us and we have to live with it. We should be talking about these stories so that we can make them better in the future and bring awareness to them. For many women, tending to the emotional state of our male bosses, be it with smiles, a sympathetic ear, or indulging in their humor, wasn't listed in our job description, but it was expected of us nonetheless. It was a playful, sensitive female kind of companionship and a defining element of our daily drudge. It introduced itself bit by bit, increasingly pushing boundaries, making us ever more vulnerable, and in some cases, priming us for abuse. Now, I don't know about you, but I have absolutely experienced this at work without realizing it until after the fact. I did have a boss where openly, as women, we had to discuss that we had to stroke his ego if we wanted to stay on his good side. This was also a boss that would fire anybody that asked for a well-deserved raise and then rehire a young, usually attractive college student or recent graduate to replace that person. Don't ask me why I stayed at that job for 4 years. Because I didn't know any better, because I thought that was what the corporate world was, and I was excelling. I was doing it. I was putting up with the abuse in exchange for I got laid off. So 118. I went into the whole thing willingly. And even though I got hurt, I figured, well, this just comes with the territory, I guess. When there is no place for you and you have to carve out your own place, you become accustomed to the abuse you have to garner along the way to get there and make space for yourself. But this is the problem of why we talk about the wage gap so much and why some people don't believe it exists, because there are people that have carved out a space for themselves, right? And then there's other people who are saying like, hey, I couldn't do that, right? Like, I shouldn't have to carve out a space for myself. Like, we should have a space here for me. And then people are like, no. That means I have to move over. I have to give up some of my space so that you have space. That is the problem. That is simplified, yes, but that is the problem. I want to share another quote tagging onto this concept of finding space because it goes hand in hand. We'll take more pride in having withstood workplace abuse than we would in trying to actually end it. And I'm sure this is true for a lot of people, is you kind of have that like, look how tough I am. Look how much I went through, instead of standing up and trying to make things better for future people who would experience the same abuse. The worship of toughness drives our complicity. Professional cruelty and exploitation offers a means to validation and deservedness, while disproportionately burdening those with an additional need to prove their place. I'll admit, I fell subject into this. Without even knowing it, you're a part of this system, unless you are actively aware of it and then trying to prevent it in the future. That's the problem, is you have to be aware of what's happening to be able to change it. And most people don't want to be aware of what's happening because it's benefiting them, or it's too hard to change, or it's scary. You might lose your job if you stand up and say something. And we do live in a world where being a whistleblower or not being believed or having repercussions because you're going against the norm and trying to make things better isn't beneficial most of the times. Like it can be very scary, which I totally understand. Again, this isn't a right or wrong. This is a where we are, how we got here, and what we're not understanding of the current situation. 62. Some feminists argue that an ethos of watch how I can put up with this stuff, or even watch how I can dole it out myself, has become an imperative for women who want to prove their value as human capital. Now, yes, we are in a capitalistic society, and what that unfortunately means right now in the state that we're at, billionaires, owners of companies use our willingness to be exploited as human capital to make more money. And that is the cycle that we're on currently, where our willingness to comply and obey the system that they want to set up so that they can make more money and pay us less and less and less and less and less and less and give us less and less and less and less benefits to live our lives. The system is like, yes, continue to do that. Continue to accept less medical benefits. You don't get a pension anymore. Unions, bad. Remember when it used to be 9 to 5? Like, the younger generations don't refer to 9 to 5 anymore. It's an 8 to 5. Or everyone has to have a side hustle, the 5 to 9, or the 5 to 9 after my 9 to 5, so that I can actually live and pay rent. It's turned into this. Watch how I can manage the exploitation of my job with dignity and grace. Watch how I can optimize the precious free time I have with color-coded Excel sheets. Watch how I can succeed as a working mom in a country void of accessible childcare, thanks to the care work of a woman of color who spends a minimum of 12 hours a day in my home. And this is all about the Me Too movement. This is a study from 2013. So yes, has it gotten better in the 10 years? Absolutely. Companies are realizing, with work remote, but now we're taking work from home away. We're losing our benefits. We've gone away from the employees have the power situation to now the employers are laying people off in droves so that they can hunker down their budgets. And now employers have the power again, and they're chopping salaries. They're chopping benefits. They're chopping all of the things that made the progress that we were getting as like workers' rights, right? Living like a human being, not having to slave away at a 9-to-5 just so I can enjoy, I don't know, a Sunday brunch. There is also some interesting research that was not put in this book that I think is pertinent of women traditionally, of when compared to men, women will be more qualified for the role and it will still be given to the man. Let me find that really fast. This is why I read, so I can go back and reference my other books. And I'm sure if you are already disliking this book, you're probably looking at the title of this book and going like, oh my God. First of all, it's written by a man. And second of all, it's not as clickbaity as you think of the title, but definitely a good read because it explains so much about corporate culture that is BS. But something in this book and in a ton of research online shows that the difference of how men and women apply for jobs and what like imposter syndrome that happens more prevalently in women than it does in men. And it shows that women feel like they need to be 100% qualified for a job before they will apply to it, whereas men feel like they only need to be like 50% qualified to apply for it. This also comes to play when you're talking about races and how traditionally people of color need to be more qualified to get the same visibility as a man to get the role. So when we're looking at the data and statistics of equal roles across the board, women and people of color, or really any marginalized group, is more qualified for the role than the man. If that makes you mad and you want to say something about it in the comments, I will pull up the research in response, because I'm not going to go look it up right this second. But it does exist and you can easily Google it for yourself as well. And that's the main thing about videos that I do like this. It's not to make people angry. It's not to ruffle feathers, even though I know it's going to. It is to start conversation and it is to build on where we are at and get to progress, get to a better society, make things better for the people in the future. And as a mom now, I think it's very important to understand where we are in this world to be able to build a better life for my son. He's got to be aware of all these things too when he starts becoming a man in the world, a white man in the world. I know we don't like talking about privilege. It makes us uncomfortable. You don't need to be guilty of the privilege that you have. You just need to be aware of it. How we fix it. Which brings us to part 3, how we fix it. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetimes, but it is something that we can instill in the future generations and then we can continue working on because progress is not linear, as we have seen. The progress that we have made can fall back, but that doesn't mean the overall trajectory of where we are going and what we can instill in the future is diminished. If you don't believe me, go look at anyone's 20-year history on a stock portfolio. The future and our responsibility. Now, this was a term that I had to go look up. Neoliberalism. What the hell is it? And I will put the definition for you to read. Neoliberalism is a political and economic theory that gained significant influence in the late 20th century, promoting free market capitalism with limited government intervention. It's rooted in the ideas of classic liberalism, but differs by recognizing a limited role for the state in ensuring a competitive order. The term is often used by critics to describe policies they oppose and is associated with leaders like Reagan and Thatcher. Say what you will about, now I'm sure we all have our opinions on Reaganomics, but that's for a different time. Paul, I'm going to butcher this last name, Verhaeghe, Perhaeghe, professor of psychoanalysis at Ghent University in Belgium, has spent decades researching neoliberalism's impact on personality and argues that we're suffering the consequences of an economic system that rewards psychopathic tendencies. There's another book that I know I've read that goes into leaders having psychopathic tendencies. Like we've all heard that CEOs have psychopathic tendencies, right? Apparently that's just in America. I mean, how many of you have actually interacted with a CEO? Like personally, one-on-one, like a mega corporation CEO. I'm not talking about your small business or mom and pop shop. I mean, I'm sure that there are some people that align with those, but like the big CEOs, right? I'm also sure that there's research that points to that. But before we go into it, what are psychopathic tendencies, right? Now, there is also a big disclaimer. Psychopathic tendencies and being a psychopath two very different things, right? Just like being a narcissist and having narcissistic traits, two different things. I'm not calling anybody a psychopath. I'm just quoting what it says in the book, talking about people, right? Psychopathic tendencies refers to a cluster of personality traits and behaviors that deviate from societal norms and often lead to antisocial and criminal behavior. All right, now as I say these, all of our disclaimers in the past, you just let me know if someone comes to mind that represents this, that is a high up person at a company, okay? Glibness and superficial charm, manipulativeness and deceitfulness, lack of remorse and guilt, and callous and lack of empathy. Emotional traits, shallow affect and emotional poverty, impulsivity and a lack of planning, grandiosity and narcissism, and aggressive and violent tendencies. Lifestyle traits, irresponsibility and a lack of goals, parasitic lifestyle and a dependency on others, failure to learn from mistakes, early childhood behavioral problems. Obviously, we wouldn't know that about anybody in adulthood in the workplace, but you get where I'm going. We've heard come up stories. So what's interesting about all these traits and about the discussion that we've had in the past is this entire book is kind of looking at the Me Too movement and Harvey Weinstein and the characters that played out in that grand scheme of things, right? Like that's the level we're talking about here. It's like we know he was locking women in rooms with him and forcing them to touch him so that they would not lose their career. That's the power and influence we're talking about. And I'm sure as we've gone on, you've thought of much smaller things, like much smaller instances or experiences you've had, stories you've heard, women that you know that have been abused and treated poorly in the workplace. And it's all a pipeline to that, right? From the most extreme to like the baby steps of getting into that. And it's all like, you know, like someone could walk down that line easily to get to the Harvey Weinstein level because they got away with everything to get there. And as humans, what do? We keep doing. We see how far we can push and test. That's just human nature. Now, why is this book called Complicit? Okay, we're getting full circle here. We're coming to the end of how we get better. And unfortunately, it's not just hold abusers accountable, except it is. It quite literally is that easy. But it's stop being complicit in the things that enable the abusers to get away with it, to continue in their level of power, in their positions of power. Stop being complicit in the societal standards that allow these abusive men to be in power and get away from any accountability. White women have been rightly called the foot soldiers of the patriarchy. Historically, we've always upheld social injustice and have always been a threat to non-whites. There's our long overlooked role as active slave owners, our participation in the Klan, and our history of making false assault allegations resulting in the lynching of untold numbers of innocent Black men. More recently, there's our record of putting racist, misogynistic, homophobic, anti-choice white men into public office and positions of power. The lest we forget our unchecked, sometimes rabid privilege, we will always have Karen memes to show us white women reaching new depths of bigotry and self-entitlement. And look, I completely understand if you hear that and you go, well, that's not me. It doesn't matter. And that's where we get stuck. And the ability to have progress is we look at our own actions and say, I would never do that. I'm a good person. It's not necessarily just about us. It's about the people we're around, the things we allow them to say and going unchecked. It is the man that has a friend that made an uncomfortable joke and you just kind of laughed with them and didn't say that it was inappropriate. It's that not so honest review you gave of someone at work because you really didn't want to upset anybody's feelings and you just kind of want to keep your head down and do your job, right? It's the little actions that lead to someone taking advantage of and going full force because it's not the good people, right? They're doing the abusive things. It's the people with sociopathic tendencies that take advantage of and manipulate the people with good intentions in this world so that they can have further influence, power, and free reign to do whatever they want with no repercussions. Which brings me to my last and final quote of this book that I think is probably the most powerful and important that I can share with you. I had to become comfortable with him being uncomfortable. That's a quote from someone who was finding the courage to report her abusive boss to HR. I pretended like nothing was happening, and the reason why was because I felt so badly for him. I really deeply respected him as a human being, and I hated watching him do these things, even if it were to me. We look for a way to make excuses for other people, right? We look for a way to justify the behavior instead of calling it out. We avoid making other people uncomfortable because that's what empathetic good people do. That's who we want to be. Hi, Dozer. Do you need attention? We want to be those good people, so we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to make other people's lives challenging. We don't want to be wrong, but the people doing wrong aren't doing those same things. And so we have to stand up and hold them accountable so that the bad things stop. I hope you enjoyed this video, and definitely go pick up a copy of this book. There's so many more good discussion topics, things, firsthand stories, and research that this book dives into that we haven't even started to cover. And if you want me to do this for more books, please leave recommendations down in the comments. If you didn't like this book and this video upset you, please, I encourage you to go look up the research on what we discussed today and find research that disputes it if you would like to argue in the comments. If you don't have facts and data, your opinions don't really hold weight, right? I want to encourage healthy discussion, but I also want to state that facts are what we're looking at. Hello, Dozer. Hello. Hi, squishy buddy. I wish you could hear how loudly he's purring. Personally, I would love to be able to get to a world where it's not normalized that every single woman I talk to has an abuse story. It should be shocking when you hear someone have a traumatic story of being sexually abused and it's normalized amongst women. That's where the Me Too movement came from, is because 90% of the time you're sharing something that happened to you with another woman and they say, oh yeah, me too, and not, oh my gosh, that's terrible. We shouldn't be able to relate that easily about rape and sexual abuse that has happened to us. We shouldn't. And if you don't agree with that, might be part of the problem. Thanks for liking and subscribing. I'll see you next time.